You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
I want to introduce a tradition here for this podcast and all future podcasts, wherein I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Knowing the stories of the Aboriginal people will always be written in this landscape. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. So, let me get into the guts of today's episode. And that fundamentally is based on a recent interview that I did with Thrive Global. And I thought it was really probably not just good, but useful and important to extrapolate on what that interview was about. And essentially, the interview was really talking about cultivating wellness habits in 4 areas of our lives: mental wellness, physical wellness, emotional wellness, and spiritual wellness. Now, being a somewhat hierarchical thinker, I went, okay, how about we structure this a little bit? And so I changed the order around, and in today's episode, I'm going to cover the main framework. So I'm going to begin by talking a bit about physical wellness, then mental wellness, emotional wellness, and finally spiritual wellness. And I won't get to this in this episode, but I'm certainly going to do the next episode on social well-being, because I think the whole area of social well-being, social ethics is highly, highly neglected. As you've heard me talk about in other episodes, we have a tendency to be somewhat reductionistic in our culture. And so in this context, it's all come down to the individual. And my argument is that that's not necessarily a very useful perspective. What we need is a much more in-depth and holistic view of what it is that we do as human beings and how we function and how we relate. So, important point. So let's start off a little bit with this whole area of physical wellness. Now, the catchphrase or the tag that I want you to think about in this context is: you cannot have a calm mind in a tense body. I've spoken about this before, but it's worth repeating. So how do I get on top of that? Well, the first place to start is that you need to cultivate some healthy sleeping habits. Now, my partner from time to time accuses me of being a bit of a sleep procrastinator. Now, I'd like to deny that, but the truth of the matter is that I am. After a fairly intense day at work, often finishing around 7 p.m., there's nothing that I enjoy more than sort of coming home, having dinner, occasional glass of wine, and then settling into watching some of my favourite programs. Now, that'd be all well and good if I could just allow myself to finish at 10:30 at night. But the reality is, let's just do another episode spiel that comes out of my mouth. And of course, she then pokes me and goes, no, you're tired, you need to go to bed. And she is absolutely right. I shouldn't be doing this. It's, if a client of mine told me this, I'd be, the first person to sort of chip them and, tap them on the shoulder and going, are you really doing the best that you can for yourself? And the answer is obviously no. So in that context, we need to cultivate a couple of things. Firstly, good sleep hygiene, which means don't procrastinate going to bed when you're tired. Secondly, I think it's really important to look at the number of hours that you get to sleep. Now, for most adults, that number is somewhere between 7.5 to 8, maybe 8.5 hours. It does depend a little bit. And no, just because we're getting older doesn't mean we need less sleep. Usually what happens is that we sleep worse as we get older. A friend of mine argues that that's because he's got so much on his brain that he can't switch it off. So the other part of it is also to look at the combination between sleep hygiene and sleep duration. So if you have a tendency to go to bed at a reasonable time, but then spend, the next hour and a half to 2 hours on a screen, that is a definite no-no. So give yourself a break from screens from at least, 8:30, 9 o'clock onwards. TV is an exception, okay? But, no iPhones, no iPads, no other tablets, notebooks, whatever. Okay, so that's the first bit. The other bit is let's look at, what you're doing in terms of nutrition. So my observation has always been that as a species, we have a tendency to overdo things, right? So I watch, people eat the amount that they do, and in most cases, it's not healthy, especially when it's chock-a-block with, takeaway, highly processed foods, lots of sugars. So the idea is, like in all things, eat in moderation. As I said, we have a tendency to err into excess. We don't just get excessive about food, but we do it with alcohol as well. I mean, the number of issues that I have to address with people in terms of alcohol consumption, and unfortunately these days with a number of other drugs, is serious. Okay? One way of eating in moderation is cut down the portion size. Don't whack half a chicken on the plate just because it smells great. Even if you're training heavily, for whatever reason, you need to consider your calorific intake. The other part to this is then exercise and relaxation. And a lot of guys will tell me, my relaxation is exercising. And my comment is, well, no, exercise is one form of physical activity that releases tension, but it also increases tension. For a start, you're going to be using a significant amount of adrenaline at certain points, especially if you're in competition as well. Relaxation is different. Relaxation is getting to the body to slow down, to reduce the amount of adrenaline and cortisol that's going through the system. And then it's about shutting down the mind, switching the mind off. Okay, so really, really important aspect to the whole deal. So keep exercise and relaxation in many respects separated to some degree. Now, one way I get around some of the guys going, yeah, but, exercise really, it helps me sleep better, and, I just feel so much better in myself when I exercise really hard, and I get that. So how about this? How about you do your workout, and then for 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the workout, you pursue a relaxation exercise. It could be abdominal breathing combined with progressive muscle relaxation. That's usually a good one because it focuses directly on releasing the tension out of the muscles, and it keeps retraining the muscles, especially the large muscle groups, to let go. Okay? And the other part might be 5-10 minutes sitting in silence, eyes closed, and turning inward to allowing the mind to go still. Okay, just a few tips on physical wellness. Now, the important bit about all of this is don't do it sporadically. Get a routine going. Make this thing tick for you. There's no point going to a gym, smashing yourself for, a week or 2 weeks and then getting, progressively less regular with it because you can't stand the pain. That's not useful. Do it in such a way that it actually motivates you to keep going back. Okay? Now, next one I want to focus on is emotional wellness. Okay. And I've got a bit of a shorthand with this one. Okay. And again, most of you will have heard this material in other areas, in other podcasts from me. So I want you, when you think about emotional wellness, to focus on the 3 A's. That is awareness, which means raising my awareness of sensations, feelings, and thoughts and how they affect me. The second A is about acceptance. And what I want everybody, I want to encourage you to focus on accepting things as they are, not how they should be. And then once you've done that, so once you're in that space of accepted things for what they are, you might want to ask yourself the question, well, with all of this stuff, is there anything that I can do with it or about it? Do not try to change something that you have no influence over. It is a complete waste of energy, frustrates and actually demotivates you. And so you're going to be in a perpetual cycle of tension. Okay? All right. So the third A, action. As I said, this is about taking the right action at the right time with the right tools. And fundamentally, it boils down to this. Deal with what you can change and meditate on the value of doing no harm. It's in the doing of it. So, we've covered 2, physical and emotional wellness. Well, what about spiritual wellness? Now, this is an interesting topic because if you ask 100 people what is meant by spirituality, you're going to end up with people who accept the spiritual almost out of intuition that, yes, there is something that is bigger than me and that is encompassing and that has some sort of connection. And then you'll get another group which basically goes, it's all bollocks. What are we talking about? And so one of the ways of resolving this, because I don't believe that this is an either or topic, I think that this might be a bit of an and also proposition in the sense that it's not bollocks, but a lot of the stuff that we think about or told about spirituality is actually more like magic. It's a fun topic, but does it really say anything? So, one of the first things that I want to do when I talk about spirituality is I want you to think about what your view is and how do you develop a healthy, safe, and secure relationship with yourself? Because maybe that's the beginning point. Maybe it is to acknowledge and validate that I do have an ego, but that I can transcend beyond that ego. And part of that is my inner relationship with myself. In this relationship, I want to be able to foster self-acceptance and satisfaction according to very, very sound values that I practice every day in my life and encourage others to do the same. So you got to ask yourself the question, as I always pose to you, how can you have a healthy relationship with others when you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself, let alone allow it to be spiritual? Now, let me add a further relevant point into this. Let's say that part of being in a spiritual space is the transcendence beyond ego, beyond my own confines of my inner world and my feelings and thoughts and the thing that I believe to be me. Now, as we know, there's lots of chemicals out there that will help to create a sense of that. Okay, psilocybin, the psychedelics, MDMA, all sorts of drugs, LSD, will create a transcendent experience. But what about being able to tap into that from time to time, occasionally, without those chemicals? The capacity to move into a space of transcendence. That is, in a nutshell, the experience that we get from the yogis, the gurus, the mystic Christians, the Sufi, right? So there is some background, and it doesn't need to be religious. It can be simply philosophical. In fact, in some places, I talk about the ecology of the transcendent experience, which is when you get in touch with nature. So, a couple of tips. If you want to get into that space, firstly, practice empathy. It is one of the foundation behaviors, emotional and physical behaviors, that are critically important. Put yourself into other people's shoes, but also you can put yourself into other beings' shoes. If you've got a dog, imagine what it's like to be that dog and the way that you treat that dog. The second bit is, and I want everybody to consider this very, very seriously, unplug from the digital world and plug into nature at a regular interval. My friend, Professor Mark Williams, talks about how smartphones make us dumber. And in fact, there's growing evidence that being always in the digital world rewires our brain. And by the look of it, it's not positive. So we need to be able to stay in this space that doesn't create these conflicts in terms of ideas, values, desires, wishes, and so on, but rather that we can settle into ourselves and resolve the internal conflicts that come with being alive in a crazy, crazy world, because that's what it is at times. It's just off the charts. So, when I talk about unplugging from the digital world, is spend at least some part of the day away from any electronics. Put your phone away when you come home from work. Turn it off. Oh, but what if my kids want to get hold of me? Okay, fair call. But there's also a place where it is absolutely necessary that you are not contactable. Once upon a time, the moment we left the house and were out of range of a landline, that was it. People couldn't get hold of you. And, it was okay. We didn't have massive social problems. We didn't have massive problems individually. So I think, being able to detach from this constant barrage of information, visual, auditory, is a way of encouraging ourselves into a sense of spiritual wellness. Okay, now, one of the things that I want to do in the next episode, and I'll plug this now, is I want to focus on the relationship between my mental well-being and how it intersects with social well-being. Okay, now in order to do that, I'm going to make it a little bit more tricky in our deep dive into that realm. And that is, I want to look at what doesn't work and what will work if we put our heads together and run with it. So, for all of you out there, let me challenge you. Pay attention to what you're doing to your body. Pay attention to what you're doing emotionally. The thing that we should be fostering in children, teenagers, adults, right until the moment we leave this world, when we pass away, is my perpetual striving or perpetual personal growth towards a higher consciousness. And we seem to, have gotten completely lost with that concept. It was all the rage in the 60s and a large part of the 70s, but then the neo-libs got hold of things and all of that got, boo-hooed. It's been completely irrelevant and there's no such thing as society and da-da-da-da-da. I won't get into that one in this one now, but I want to challenge you. Our well-being is seriously and intractably related to the well-being of our society. If our society is sick or toxic, we become sick or toxic. The proof's in the pudding, the evidence is out there. So until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.